The wind screamed across the white mountains, pushing walls of snow through the air like a living thing. Mark pulled his thick fur-lined hood tighter around his face. His boots crunched over the frozen surface, each step sinking into the powder. The air was so cold it bit his skin even through layers of clothing. His breath came out as heavy clouds of mist, instantly freezing on the edge of his scarf. Mark had been traveling for 3 days across this part of Vera. The planet was wild, dangerous and beautiful, with endless ice plains and jagged peaks that glistened under the weak light of its pale sun. Earth's colony scouts had marked this region for resource survey. Mark's task was to check the mountains for mineral deposits that could help the settlement grow. He was used to long, lonely missions. He liked the silence and the challenge. But today was different. The storm had come without warning. What started as a gentle snow had turned into a howling blizzard. He had already decided to set up camp for the night when his scanner beeped. The sound was faint, a soft ping against the background noise of the wind. Mark stopped, pulling the small device from his coat. It showed a weak life sign about 200 meters ahead. His first thought was that it must be an animal. But the readings were strange. There were 2 life signs, close together, both very faint. Mark hesitated for a moment. The storm was getting worse, and moving off his planned route could be risky. But leaving something, or someone, out there to die didn't sit right with him. He turned toward the signal and began moving quickly through the snow. The wind tried to push him back, but he kept going, leaning forward to keep balance. His goggles were half covered in ice, and he had to wipe them often to see the scanner. The beeping grew louder. Finally, he saw shapes in the snow ahead. At first, they looked like lumps of ice, but as he drew closer, he realized they were bodies. 2 figures lying almost motionless, half buried in the drift. His heart jumped. They were humanoid, but not human. Their skin was pale blue like frost over a frozen lake. Their hair was long and silvery, tangled by the wind. They wore thin clothing made from some kind of woven animal fur, but the garments were torn. Snow had gathered on their faces and hands. Mark knelt beside the nearest one. Her eyes were closed, and her breathing was shallow. The other lay only a meter away, curled as if trying to shield herself from the cold. He touched the first one's neck gently. The skin was freezing, but he felt a faint pulse. "You're still alive," he muttered. There was no time to waste. The temperature could kill them within minutes. Mark dropped his pack in the snow, unrolled his emergency thermal blanket, and wrapped it around the first figure. Then he pulled the second closer and did the same. Lifting them both would be difficult, but leaving either behind was not an option. Mark shifted one onto his back and carried the other in his arms. His legs sank into the snow with each step, the weight pulling on his muscles, but he pushed forward. He could see the faint outline of his shelter beacon through the storm. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, he reached the small domed tent of his field shelter. He pushed through the flap, carrying the 2 figures inside. The warmth hit him like a wave. The shelter's heater hummed softly, and the air smelled faintly of metal and heated fabric. Mark set the bed. Sisters, for he could now see they looked alike, on the insulated floor and quickly unwrapped them. Their skin was icy cold, their lips pale. He pulled out his med kit and placed heat patches on their necks and wrists, spots where warmth could spread through the body faster. He worked quickly, rubbing their hands to encourage circulation. Slowly, the younger-looking one stirred. Her Eyelids fluttered, revealing deep, violet eyes. She looked at him in confusion, then fear. Mark raised his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "You're safe," he said in a calm voice. She didn't understand the words, but his tone seemed to reach her. The older one awoke moments later. She sat up weakly, glancing around the shelter before focusing on Mark. Her gaze was sharper, cautious, as if she was already judging whether he could be trusted. They spoke to each other in a language that was soft and musical with flowing tones. Mark could not understand a single word. He reached into his pack and pulled out his portable translator, a small oval device with a glowing blue line down the middle. He placed it between them and spoke slowly. "I am Mark. I found you outside, in the snow. You were freezing. You are safe here." The device clicked, and a rough version of his words came out in their language. The older one listened, then replied. The translator rendered her answer in a flat, mechanical voice. Thank you. You saved us." Mark nodded. "What happened to you?" The translator repeated his question. The younger one spoke quickly, her voice higher than her sister's. The machine struggled to keep up but managed to translate. "Storm. Came fast. We separated from others. We walked many hours. Then we fell. No more strength." Mark handed them heated ration packs. They looked at the strange plastic pouches curiously before opening them. Steam rose from the food, and their eyes widened at the warmth. They tasted it carefully, then ate with growing hunger. As they ate, Mark studied them more closely. They were clearly sisters. Their faces shared the same high cheekbones, small noses, and the faint glow of their eyes in the dim light. The older one carried herself with calm dignity, while the younger one moved with restless energy. He wanted to ask where their people were, but for now letting them rest seemed best. The storm still raged outside, and the shelter shook under the force of the wind. They would not be going anywhere tonight. The older sister set her food aside and looked at Mark. Through the translator, she said, "You are not from here. Your clothes, your face, different." Mark nodded. "I am from another world, Earth." They exchanged a quick look, their expressions shifting to surprise, then curiosity. The younger one asked, "Many like you here?" "Some," Mark answered. "We have a settlement far south. I was exploring when I found you." The older sister bowed her head slightly. "Then we owe you our lives, Mark of Earth." The younger one smiled faintly, though her eyes still held traces of exhaustion. Mark felt the shelter's small heater humming steadily, warming all three of them. Outside, the storm howled without mercy, but inside, for now, there was safety. He knew tomorrow he would need to decide what to do next, whether to help them find their people or bring them to the human settlement. But tonight, the only thing that mattered was that they were alive. The morning light that filtered into the shelter was weak and pale, as if the sun itself was still half asleep behind the thick clouds. Mark had not rested much. Every time the wind outside howled, he opened his eyes to check that the shelter was still holding firm. But mostly he had stayed awake to keep an eye on the two alien sisters. They had slept close to the heater, wrapped in emergency blankets. Their breathing was steadier now, their skin no longer dangerously cold. The younger one stirred first. She sat up slowly, blinking as if trying to remember where she was. When she saw Mark, she tilted her head and gave a curious look, as though wondering why a stranger had taken them in instead of leaving them out in the snow. Mark offered her a gentle nod and pointed to a cup of warm water he had prepared. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted it. The steam rose against her face, and she closed her eyes briefly, as if even the smell of warmth was a gift. The older sister woke soon after. She scanned the shelter quickly, her eyes landing on Mark with the same cautious focus as before. There was no fear now, but there was still careful watchfulness. Mark respected that. Trust was not something you gave away in a place like Vera. The portable translator lay between them. Mark picked it up, switched it on, and spoke clearly. "How are you feeling?" The device repeated his words in their melodic language. The older sister responded, "We are better, still weak, but alive. Because of you." Mark nodded. "That is good. I am glad I found you." The younger one touched the translator with curiosity. "How does it speak our words?" "It learns," Mark explained. "It listens and repeats. It is not perfect, but it helps." Her violet eyes widened. "It is like a little spirit in a shell." Mark gave a small smile at the description. "Something like that." They shared a simple breakfast of nutrient bread and rehydrated fruit. The sisters examined every bite before eating, clearly unused to human food. The younger one liked the fruit, eating with quick, happy bites. The older one ate slowly, as if thinking about every taste. When they had finished, Mark began asking questions. "Where were you going before I found you?" The older sister, whose name he learned was Nira, answered first. "We were with our people far to the north. The storm came fast. We became lost." Mark glanced at the younger one. "And your name?" she smiled. "Luma." Nira's voice lowered slightly. "We were traveling together, but there is more." She glanced at Luma, and for a moment, it seemed she was deciding whether to say more, but she remained quiet. Mark didn't push. He could tell there was something they were not ready to share. Instead, he said, "When the storm ends, I can help you find your people." The translator repeated his words. This time, instead of relief, he saw a flicker of unease on both their faces. Luma was the first to speak. "Maybe we do not need to go back right away." That was strange. In Mark's experience, separated travelers usually wanted to return to their group as soon as possible, but before he could ask why, the wind outside gave a violent gust, shaking the shelter. The storm was still far from over. Mark checked his scanner. "The weather will last another day, maybe two. We should stay here until it clears." The sisters agreed. It was safer to remain where they had heat and supplies. The day passed slowly. They spoke in short sentences, using the translator, to share simple stories. Mark told them about Earth, green forests, blue oceans, and the warm sun. Luma listened with wide eyes, interrupting with many questions. "Is your sky always blue? Do you have snow there? Do people live in houses made of stone?" Nira was quieter, but she paid close attention. Sometimes she looked as if she was comparing his words to something from her own memories. When evening came, Mark prepared another warm meal. Outside, the snow was a constant white blur. Inside, the shelter was a small bubble of light and warmth, in an endless frozen world. After dinner, Luma pointed at Mark's wrist device. "What is that?" "It is a tracker and communicator," he explained. "It tells me where I am, and I can send messages to the settlement if I need help. Could you call them now? She asked. Yes, Mark said, but in this storm, they cannot send a ship. We have to wait. Luma nodded, though she looked a little disappointed. Later, as they settled in for the night, Nira finally spoke again in a quieter tone. Mark, if you help us, we will not forget. But there is a reason we do not wish to return quickly. Mark leaned forward slightly. I am listening. She hesitated. Our tribe has rules. Some rules we cannot accept. We were being sent away to join other clans. We did not choose it. We did not want it. That is why we left. The storm found us before we could find shelter. Mark listened carefully. He had seen similar things before on other worlds, traditions that were normal for one people but hard for outsiders to accept. Still, this was their life, their culture. I see, he said. You are safe here for now. When the storm ends, we can decide the next step. Nira gave a small nod. Thank you. Luma smiled, though her eyes held a trace of something deeper, perhaps hope, perhaps uncertainty. The shelter was quiet again, except for the hum of the heater. Outside, the storm showed no sign of slowing. Mark leaned back against the wall, thinking about what they had told him. It was not a simple rescue anymore. There was more at stake than just surviving the cold. He glanced at the sisters one more, time before closing his eyes. For now, they were safe. But the moment the storm ended, choices would have to be made. Choices that could change all of their lives. By the second morning, the storm had grown quieter. The wind still whistled outside, but it no longer shook the shelter. The snow had piled so high that the entrance flap was half covered, leaving only a narrow way out. Mark sat by the heater, drinking a cup of hot liquid from his ration kit, while the two sisters spoke quietly in their own language. The translator rested on the floor between them, switched off. Mark had learned that they only used it when they wanted him to understand. This private conversation was clearly not for him, so he waited, using the time to check his gear. His power cells were running low. He would need to move soon if he wanted to keep the shelter warm and the translator working. When Nira finally turned to him, her face was calm, but her eyes looked tired. The snow is less. We can walk today. Mark nodded. Yes, but you must. Tell me where you wish to go. Do you want to return to your tribe? Luma lowered her gaze. Nira shook her head slightly. We have no wish to return. Mark leaned forward. Yesterday you said your tribe has rules you do not accept. Tell me everything. If I am to help you, I must know. The sisters exchanged a glance. Luma bit her lip, then spoke first. Our tribe is made of many families. We travel together, hunt together, survive together. But when girls grow, the elders choose partners for them. It is the way of our people. Always has been. Mark kept his voice steady. And they chose for you? Nira nodded. Yes, for both of us. But not from our own hearts. We were promised to two men from faraway clans. This joining was to make our tribe stronger, but it would separate us. We have never been apart. Luma's voice grew sharper. We told the elders we did not want this. They did not listen. The joining was set for the next full moon. So we left. Mark understood now. They had not simply been caught in the storm while traveling. They had run away, and the storm had almost ended their escape. What would happen if you went back? Now? He asked. Nira looked at the floor. The leader would punish us, then force the joining anyway. It is not his way to forgive. Mark's mind began to work through the problem. From a human law perspective, he had no right to interfere with another culture's traditions unless it caused direct harm. But as a person, as someone who had carried them through the snow, the idea of sending them back to face punishment felt wrong. Before he could respond, his scanner beeped. The sound was low but urgent. He pulled it from his pocket. It showed movement outside, large, slow, and circling in the distance. "What is it?" Nira asked. Mark checked the reading. Again, "Not human. Not from your tribe either. Possibly an animal. We should move before it comes closer." Luma's eyes widened. "What kind of animal?" "Big," Mark said simply. "And hungry." They packed quickly. Mark gave each sister a small heat patch to wear under their clothes and strapped his rifle across his shoulder. When they stepped outside, the light was blinding after 2 days in the dim shelter. The snow stretched endlessly in every direction, broken only by jagged black rocks poking through the drifts. The wind was lighter now, carrying a crisp scent of ice and distant mountains. But Mark didn't let the beauty distract him. He kept scanning the horizon. Somewhere out there, something was moving. They began walking south, toward the human settlement, though it was still several days away. Mark had decided not to risk taking them toward the tribe's lands. That was too dangerous, and it would go against their wishes. After an hour, the scanner beeped again, closer this time. Mark stopped, holding up his hand for silence. The sisters froze beside him. In the distance, across a low ridge, a shadow moved. It was large, with a hunched shape and long limbs. Nira whispered, "Ice beast." Mark had heard of them. Predators that lived in the deep snowfields. They hunted by scent and sound, their bodies covered in thick fur and hard, crystal-like spikes for armor. Even one could be deadly. "It is following us," Luma said softly. Mark nodded. "We keep moving, slowly. Do not run unless I tell you." They moved carefully along the ridge, the snow crunching under their boots. The beast's shadow disappeared from view, but Mark knew it was still there. His finger rested near the rifle's trigger. Ready. An hour later, they reached a cluster of jagged rocks where they could take shelter. Mark guided the sisters inside a narrow gap between 2 stones. "Stay here," he said. "If it comes close, do not make a sound." He climbed to a higher rock to look out. The white landscape stretched in all directions, but then he saw it, the ice beast, moving slowly toward their trail. Its body was massive, its legs thick as tree trunks. Its back was lined with sharp, glistening spikes that caught the pale sunlight. Mark steadied his rifle. A direct shot to the head or neck might stop it, but with its armor, there was no guarantee. He waited, watching the way it moved. The beast's head lifted, sniffing the air. Then it turned, heading straight toward the rocks. Mark's pulse quickened. "Stay down," he called quietly to the sisters. The creature came closer, its heavy, paws sinking deep into the snow. At 20 meters, it let out a low, rumbling growl. Mark took aim and fired. The shot hit one of the spikes, shattering it but not stopping the beast. It roared and charged. "Move!" Mark shouted. Nira and Luma ran from the rocks as the beast closed in. Mark fired again, this time hitting its shoulder. The creature staggered, but kept coming. Luma grabbed Mark's arm, pulling him toward a narrow ice ridge. They scrambled over it just as the beast lunged, claws raking the spot where they had been. Mark turned and fired once more, aiming at the neck where the armor was thinner. The shot hit true. The beast let out a final shuddering growl before collapsing into the snow. The sisters stood breathing hard, staring at the fallen creature. Luma's voice trembled. "You killed an ice beast. Only the strongest hunters can do that." Mark lowered his rifle. "We were lucky." Nira shook her head. "Not luck. Skill." They moved on quickly, not wanting to attract other predators, but as they walked, Mark noticed a change in the sisters. They stayed closer to him, now their trust in him deeper. Luma glanced at him often, as if seeing him in a new way. By nightfall, they found shelter in a shallow ice cave. They built a small heat lantern and sat together. Nira looked at Mark seriously. "You saved us twice now. From the snow and from the beast. In our people's way, you are a protector of great honor." Mark didn't know how to answer, so he simply said, "I do what I can." But deep down, he knew that this journey was only getting more complicated. Saving them had been the easy part. What came next, protecting them from their own people, would be far harder. The ice cave was cold, but after hours in the open snow, it felt like a safe haven. The heat lantern's faint orange glow filled the narrow space, casting soft shadows on the icy walls. Outside, the sky was already darkening, and the wind carried the sharp sound of moving snow. Mark sat with his rifle resting across his knees. He could still feel the weight of the fight in his arms. The image of the ice beast charging at them replayed in his mind. They had been lucky to escape without injury. Nira was quiet, sitting cross-legged near the lantern. Her eyes were fixed on the flames, her expression thoughtful. Luma, on the other hand, moved with restless energy, running her fingers along the walls and peering toward the cave entrance as if still expecting danger. "You are sure it will not follow?" Luma asked at last. Mark shook his head. "It is not coming back. That one is gone." She gave a small nod but didn't look fully convinced. Nira finally spoke. "You risked your life for us again. This is not something we can forget." Mark kept his voice calm. "I could not leave you to face that alone." Luma crouched beside him, eyes shining in the lantern light. "We call someone like you Heart Shield, one who stands between danger and those they protect." Mark smiled faintly. "Heart Shield. I like the sound of that." They ate a small meal, sharing the last of the heated ration packs for the day. Nira ate slowly, her mind clearly on something else. Finally, she said, "You must know, our tribe will not simply give up looking for us. They will send hunters." Mark met her gaze. "Hunters?" "Yes," she said. "Strong fighters. They will follow our trail through the snow. They will not stop until we are found," Luma added. "They will say they are here to bring us home, but we know what home will mean. The joining will happen, and our voices will not matter." Mark didn't answer right away. He knew this was becoming more than just a rescue. Now it was a race to get them to safety before their people caught up. The night passed slowly. Mark stayed half awake, listening to the wind outside and the occasional shift of snow on the cave roof. When morning came, the air felt sharper, but the storm clouds had cleared. The sky above was pale silver, the sun low on the horizon. They left the cave and began moving south again. The snow was deep in places, and Mark had to break the trail while the sisters followed in his footprints. His scanner remained in his hand, checking for life signs. Around midday, the device picked up movement behind them, faint but steady. Something was following. Nira noticed his frown. "Is it the beast again?" Mark shook his head. "No, more. Then one. And moving fast." The sisters exchanged a worried glance. Luma said, "The hunters." Mark didn't argue. Whoever it was, they were closing the distance. He increased their pace, guiding them across a frozen ridge where the snow was thinner and their tracks would be harder to follow. By late afternoon, the signal on his scanner was closer. He needed a plan. The land ahead narrowed into a deep pass. Between two icy cliffs, it was a natural choke point, and if the hunters were coming, it could also be a place to slow them down. They reached the pass just as the light was fading. Mark quickly checked the high ledges above them. Loose snow and ice hung from the edges, ready to fall with the right push. "Nira, Luma, stay close to the far wall," he said. The sisters obeyed while Mark climbed halfway up the slope. He set a small charge from his pack into the snowbank, careful not to trigger it too early. Minutes later, he heard the sound, boots crunching over snow, voices carried by the wind. Figures appeared at the far end of the pass, moving with purpose. There were 4 of them, each wearing heavy fur armor, carrying long spears tipped with polished bone. One of them called out in the sisters' language. Mark glanced at the translator on his wrist. The voice said, "Daughters of the tribe, come. You have been found. You will be returned." Luma pressed herself against the wall. Nira stepped forward slightly, her chin lifted. "We will not go back. We choose our own path." The lead hunter's voice hardened. "It is not your choice. The leader commands it." Mark climbed a bit higher, his hand near the detonator. "Turn back," he called in the common language, his voice carrying through the narrow pass. "They don't want to go with you." The hunters stopped, glancing at him with open hostility. One pointed a spear in his direction and said something in their tongue. The translator caught fragments, outsider and no right. The tension in the air grew heavier. Mark's mind ran through options. A direct fight here would be risky, but he could not allow them to take the sisters. "You can tell your leader," Mark said evenly, "that they are under my protection. If you come closer, I will make sure this path is closed behind you." The hunters hesitated. They could see his hand near the detonator, and perhaps they sensed he was not bluffing. The lead hunter narrowed his eyes, but did not advance. Finally, with a sharp gesture, they began to retreat. Mark kept his eyes on them until they disappeared from sight. Only then did he climb back down. Luma let out a breath she had been holding. "I thought they would attack." "So did I," Mark admitted. "But we bought time. Not much, but enough to get farther ahead." They moved quickly until the night grew too dark to see. This time they made camp in a sheltered hollow surrounded by snow-covered boulders. As they sat by the heat lantern, Luma leaned closer to Mark. "They will come again, maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. But we will not run forever." Nira nodded. "When the time comes, we will stand with you." Mark didn't say it out loud, but he knew the truth. If the hunters returned in greater numbers, standing might not be enough. Still, as he looked at the 2 sisters, he felt the same determination he had felt when pulling them from the snow. Whatever came next, he was not letting them go without a fight. The night inside the ice cave was long and cold, though the heat from the small heater kept them from freezing. The storm outside had eased, but the air was still heavy with the kind of silence that follows danger. Mark was the first to wake. He pushed himself up slowly, feeling the ache in his arms from the fight with the ice beast the day before. His breath came out in faint clouds as he looked toward the entrance of the cave. Nira was awake too, sitting close to the small fire Mark had built from synthetic fuel. Her calm eyes followed the soft flicker of the flames. Luma still slept, curled up under a thermal blanket Mark had given her. She looked peaceful, but her hand clutched the edge of the blanket tightly, as if afraid someone might take it away. Mark stepped closer to Nira and sat beside her. "You should try to rest," he said softly. "I have rested enough," she replied. Her voice was quiet, but there was a firmness in it. "We need to talk before the sun rises." Mark glanced at her, noticing the serious tone. "What about?" Nira's gaze lifted from the fire. "We have decided we will not return to our tribe." Mark was silent for a moment. "I thought that was already your plan," he said. "It was a wish," Nira explained. "Now it is a choice. We cannot go back, not after what happened. The storm, the beast, the way you fought for us. The tribe will see us as dishonorable for leaving, but that matters less to us than our freedom." By now, Luma had stirred awake. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, joining the conversation without hesitation. "We want to stay with you," she said with a spark in her voice. "You are different. You listen to us. You fight for us. We will be safe with you." Mark looked between them, his mind turning over the situation. "I'm not sure it's that simple," he said. "Human law has rules about interfering with alien customs. If your people find us, they could cause trouble for my colony." Luma leaned forward. "Would you send us back to the life we ran from? To people who would take away our choice?" Mark hesitated. "No," he said firmly after a moment. "I wouldn't." Nira gave a faint smile, but it was tinged with worry. "Then you must know they will come for us. We are not invisible. The tribe's hunters can track in any weather. They will not stop until they find us." As if to prove her point, a sudden metallic chirp echoed through the cave. Mark's head snapped toward the sound. His scanner on the cave wall was blinking red. The signal was faint, but growing stronger. He hurried over and checked the data. "It's a drone," he said quickly. "Small, but its signal is locked on our location." Nira stood. "It belongs to the tribe," she said without doubt. "They have found us." Luma's eyes widened. "How much time do we have?" Mark read the numbers on the scanner. "A few hours at most. If they're already this close, they'll arrive by midday." The sisters exchanged a look, not of fear, but of quiet understanding. "We cannot run," Nira said. "The storm still blocks the southern pass. The only way out is the ridge, and they will come from that direction." Mark's thoughts moved quickly. He had seen the narrow ridge when they first reached the cave. It was a natural choke point, a place where only a few could pass at once. If he was going to make a stand, that would be the place. He checked his rifle, making sure the charge cells were full. He had enough energy for a fight, but not for a long battle. "If we hold the ridge, we can buy time. Maybe enough for a rescue team from the human outpost to reach us." Nira nodded. "Then we will stand with you." "You won't," Mark replied sharply. "If they attack, I need you both safe inside the cave. If something happens to me, you follow the emergency beacon. I'll leave." Luma shook her head stubbornly. "We will not hide while you fight for us. This is our choice, too." Mark met her eyes. There was no fear in them, only resolve. He let out a slow breath. "All right, but stay behind cover and follow my orders." The next hours were spent in preparation. Mark set up portable shield emitters along the ridge, placing them in a half-circle to create a defensive wall. Nira gathered ice blocks to form a second barrier, while Luma carried extra power cells and ammunition. They worked in silence, each knowing the weight of the moment ahead. When the first glint of sunlight touched the mountains, Mark could see movement in the distance, figures approaching through the snow. At least 8 of them, all wearing heavy armor made from bone and metal, their weapons long spears tipped with steel. "They're coming," Mark said quietly. Nira tightened her scarf. "That is the leader in front," she said, pointing to the tallest warrior whose armor was marked with white paint. "He will not leave without us." Mark stepped to the front of the ridge and planted his boots firmly. The wind whipped around him, carrying the sound of the approaching warriors. He raised his rifle, making it clear he was ready. When the warriors stopped a short distance away, the leader stepped forward. His voice was deep and commanding. "Human, you have taken what belongs to my tribe. Return them, and you may leave unharmed." Mark's voice was steady. "They are not yours. They choose their own path." The leader's eyes narrowed. "They are bound by our law." "They are free by mine," Mark replied. The tension was sharp, the air between them heavy with the possibility of violence. Behind Mark, Nira and Luma stood close, their faces calm but determined. The leader looked at them. "Do you choose this human over your people?" Nira answered first. "We choose freedom." Luma followed. "We choose him." The warriors shifted uncomfortably. Some looked uncertain, as if questioning their leader's command. The leader's grip on his spear tightened. Mark took a step forward. "If you try to take them, you'll face not only me, but the full strength of the human outpost. They're already on their way here." It was a bluff, but he spoke with enough confidence that the leader hesitated. He glanced back at his warriors, then at the narrowing ridge that would force them into single combat. The risk was too great. Finally, the leader lowered his spear. "Go then. But if you cross our lands again, you will not be spared." Without another word, the warriors turned and began their march back into the snow. Mark kept his rifle ready until they vanished from sight. Only then did he lower it, letting out the breath he had been holding. Nira and Luma stepped forward, relief softening their expressions. "They will not follow us now," Nira said quietly. "No," Mark agreed. "But we're not safe yet. We need to reach the outpost before nightfall." And with that, they packed their supplies and left the cave, heading toward the promise of safety beyond the frozen mountains. The snow never stopped falling that day. Mark stood at the narrow ridge of ice, his boots digging deep into the frozen surface. The wind howled through the peaks, carrying flakes that stung his face. In the distance, dark shapes moved closer. He knew who they were. The tribe had come for Nira and Luma. Behind him, inside the small cave they had used as shelter, the sisters packed the few things they had. Mark kept his rifle ready, not pointing it yet, but holding it in plain sight. He was outnumbered, and he knew that fighting was the last option. Still, he was prepared if it came to that. The first warrior stepped into view. He was tall, wrapped in thick layers of fur and bone armor. His chest plate bore carvings that glimmered faintly under the pale light. This was the leader, the one the sisters had feared. His eyes were sharp and cold, like ice that had never known warmth. Behind him came 8 more warriors, each armed with long spears tipped with metal that caught the dim light. The leader raised a hand to signal the others to stop. Then his gaze fell on Mark. "Human," he called out in the common trade. Tongue, his voice deep and firm. "You shelter what is mine. Give them back." Mark's grip on his rifle tightened. "They are not yours," he said, his voice steady. "They are free to decide for themselves." The leader's eyes narrowed. "They belong to the tribe. The tribe decides their place. This is our law." From behind Mark, Nira stepped forward, her head held high despite the biting wind. Her long, dark hair fluttered behind her. "Your law is not our choice," she said clearly. Luma joined her, her eyes bright with determination. "We will not return. We choose our own path." A murmur rose among the warriors. Some shifted their weight, their hands tightening on their spears. Others glanced at each other, uncertain. Mark noticed it. They were not all united in this. Some respected the courage of the sisters, others feared their leader too much to show it. The leader took a step forward, his boots crunching against the ice. "You speak boldly, but the tribe's ways are older than you. No outsider changes them." Mark lifted his rifle slightly, not aiming directly but making it clear he would not back down. "If you take one more step, I'll have to protect them. And I'm not alone out here." The leader paused, studying him. "Not alone?" he asked. Mark kept his tone calm but firm. "My people are close. If you harm me or them, human settlement forces will be here before the day ends. You know what that means." It was a bluff. There were no human forces anywhere near this frozen ridge. But the leader could not know that. The tribe had seen human technology before, and they knew humans did not travel without strong backup. The leader's eyes shifted, scanning the white slopes around them as if expecting hidden soldiers. His warriors began to whisper, doubt spreading in their ranks. Nira stepped forward until she was beside Mark. "Leader," she said, "you claim to protect us by forcing us to marry for alliances, but a protector listens to those he guards. We will not be traded. If you take us now, you will not only have human enemies but your own people questioning your rule." The word struck something in the group. One of the warriors, a broad man with pale eyes, lowered his spear slightly. Another glanced at the sisters with respect. The leader saw it too. His control was slipping. He stared at Nira for a long moment, then at Luma, then finally back at Mark. The wind roared around them, filling the silence. Finally, the leader exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. "Very well," he said slowly. "You may go, but remember, you will not be welcomed if you return." Nira's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "We will not return." The leader gave a sharp gesture to his warriors, and they began to turn back, disappearing into the blowing snow. A few gave the sisters respectful nods before following their leader. When the last of them vanished beyond the ridge, Mark lowered his rifle. His heart was still pounding, but he didn't let it show. Nira and Luma turned to him, their expressions full of relief. Luma let out a laugh, not of humor but of release from days of fear. "You stood for us," Nira said quietly. "Even when you didn't have to," Mark shrugged, though a small smile appeared on his face. "I couldn't let them decide your lives for you." The sisters stepped closer, and for a moment the cold seemed less sharp. The storm still raged, but the danger had passed. "Come on," Mark said, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "We've got a long way to the human outpost, and the weather isn't going to wait for us." They left the ridge behind, the snow crunching under their boots. Ahead lay more mountains and more wind, but for the first time since they had met, They walked without fear of being taken back. Nira glanced at Mark, her eyes thoughtful. "You said your people were close," she said. Mark gave a small chuckle. "Sometimes you have to say what will keep you alive." Luma grinned at that, shaking her head. "Heart Shield," she said in her language, as if confirming the title she had given him before. Mark didn't know the full meaning of the word, but he could guess. And in that frozen world, walking with the two sisters toward an uncertain future, he felt that maybe the name was fitting after all. The morning after the standoff at the ridge, the storm finally began to ease. The sky, though still heavy with gray clouds, allowed thin streams of sunlight to touch the snow. Mark woke first, brushing frost from his jacket and listening to the slow, steady breathing of the two sisters. They were huddled under their thickest blankets, still sleeping after the long, tense day before. He stepped outside the cave, his boots sinking into the snow. The air was crisp and biting, but calm compared to the roaring winds of the night. From where he stood, the mountains stretched endlessly in every direction. Somewhere beyond them was the human outpost, a cluster of shelters and heat towers where the air was warm and the walls were thick. That was their goal. When Nira and Luma woke, they were quiet at first, each lost in thought. But as they packed their small bundles, Luma began to hum a soft tune in her language. It was a song with no words, just a melody that seemed to warm the cold air. Mark didn't understand it, but he liked the sound. The journey was not easy. They crossed frozen ridges where the snow was so deep their legs ached after every step. They slid down icy slopes, catching themselves with their hands and boots. Once they had to climb over a fallen pillar of ice that blocked the narrow pass. Through it all, Mark kept a steady pace, stopping often to make sure the sisters stayed close. Around midday, they found a stretch of flat snow that allowed them to walk side by side. Nira broke the silence. "When we reach your people, will they accept us?" she asked. Mark glanced at her. "They'll be surprised, but yes, they'll accept you. Humans don't turn away those who need shelter." Luma smiled faintly. "Your people sound different from ours. You help even when it costs you." Mark shrugged. "We've learned that helping others often makes everyone stronger. A lone person can survive for a while, but a group can build a future." The sisters seemed to think about that for a while. By late afternoon, they reached a high ridge. From the top, they could see the white land stretching far ahead, and in the distance, faint shapes of structures rising from the snow. The human outpost. It was still many hours away, but the sight of it gave them all renewed energy. As they prepared to descend, a movement below caught Mark's attention. Shadows moving between the snow mounds. He raised his rifle slightly, scanning the area. The figures were small and fast, and as they came closer, he recognized them. Snow scavengers. Not human, not from the sisters' tribe, but a dangerous native species that hunted in packs. The creatures had pale fur, long limbs, and narrow faces with sharp, curved claws. Mark had seen them before. They were clever and quick, and they never hunted alone. "They're coming," Mark said quickly. Nira and Luma tightened their grips on the wooden poles they used for walking. The pack spread out, some circling from the sides. Mark took position at the front, his rifle ready. When the first scavenger lunged, Mark fired a warning shot into the snow just ahead of it. The crack of the rifle echoed across the ridge. The creature stopped, hissed, and retreated a few steps. But it didn't run. The others kept closing in. "Stay close to me." Mark said firmly. The next minutes were a blur of movement. Mark fired twice more, hitting the snow near the advancing scavengers, forcing them to pause. Nira struck one with her pole when it came too near, and Luma swung hers in a wide arc to keep another at bay. The pack circled, testing them, but the humans, and sisters didn't give them an opening. Finally, after several tense minutes, the scavengers decided the risk wasn't worth it. With a series of low growls, they turned and bounded back into the snowdrifts, disappearing into the white distance. Mark lowered his rifle, breathing hard. "You both handled that well," he said, looking at the sisters. Nira gave a small nod. "We have had to defend ourselves before." Luma smirked. "But it helps to have a human with a loud weapon." They laughed softly, and the tension eased. The sun was already dipping behind the peaks, painting the snow in pale gold. They quickened their pace, knowing they needed to reach shelter before full dark. Hours later, the lights of the human outpost glimmered brighter against the snow. Tall heat towers sent faint trails of steam into the air, and walls made from reinforced steel surrounded the cluster of buildings. Guards in thick coats stood at the gates, and as soon as they saw Mark, they waved him through. Inside, the air was warmer, and the sound of voices and machinery filled the space. The sisters looked around with wide eyes, taking in the strange shapes of the human shelters and the scent of cooked food drifting from the mess hall. Mark led them to the main building where the settlement leader, a woman named Mara, came to greet them. She was tall with short hair and a serious but kind expression. "You've been gone longer than expected," Mara said, looking at Mark. Then her eyes shifted to the sisters. "And you've brought guests." "They needed help," Mark said, simply. "Their tribe wanted to force them into lives they didn't choose. I couldn't leave them there." Mara studied Nira and Luma for a moment, then nodded. "You're safe here," she told them. "No one will force you to do anything you don't want to." The relief in the sisters' faces was clear. They thanked Mara in their own language, then followed Mark to the quarters assigned to them. Later, that night, as the settlement quieted, Mark sat outside one of the heat towers, staring at the snow beyond the walls. Nira and Luma joined him, each holding a cup of hot broth. "This place is strange," Nira said, looking at the walls and towers. "But it feels free." "It is," Mark replied. "Here, people choose their own path. No one owns you. No one decides your future but you." Luma tilted her head. "And you, Mark? What path will you choose now?" Mark thought about it. "I'll stay here. There's always work to do, people to protect. And if you decide to stay, I'll make sure you're safe." The sisters exchanged a look, and a small smile passed between them. "We will stay," Nira said at last. "We will build a life here." Mark nodded, feeling a quiet sense of satisfaction. The journey had been long, cold, and dangerous, but they had made it. The snow outside was still endless, but inside, the walls, there was warmth, safety, and the start of something new.